It sounds like something from a science fiction movie, so unreal that most historians dismissed it as rumor, yet buried deep within the fading archives of the Third Reich is evidence of one of the strangest and most unsettling military experiments of World War II. As Germany's empire began to collapse and its armies were pushed back on every front, a hidden division inside German intelligence, known only as Abteilung 3, quietly launched an operation that challenged every moral boundary of science to train monkeys to act as wartime spies. The project's official name was Projekt Menschenaffe, Project Ape Man. Its purpose was to create living agents that could move behind enemy lines without attracting suspicion, record information, deliver small objects, even sabotage equipment. It was desperate, visionary, and disturbing all at once. The idea emerged in 1943, inside a laboratory complex near Danzig. There, zoologist Dr. Ernst Schäfer, once famous for his SS-sponsored expeditions to Tibet, received direct orders to explore the military use of primates. His team included veterinarians, engineers, and psychologists, men who believed that intelligence, no matter where it came from, could be weaponized. Phase 1 focused on basic conditioning. The primates learned to respond to gestures, colors, and short whistle codes. Phase 2 went further. Miniature recording devices and transmitters were attached to their harnesses, allowing them to move through areas while collecting sound and visual data. The technology was crude but far ahead of its time. To observers, it sounded insane, but Schäfer argued that the Allies were already experimenting with messenger pigeons and trained dolphins. If animals could carry cameras or detect mines, why not transform them into mobile spies? The logic was dark, yet strangely persuasive to the Reich's leadership. A declassified Allied intelligence note from early 1944 describes a test near Königsberg. A group of trained macaques crossed a fenced zone, retrieved mock battle maps, and returned without alerting sentries. For the SS, this was proof enough. Funding tripled overnight. Soon the line between science and cruelty blurred. Schäfer's researchers began testing electrical impulses to control reflexes remotely. Small electrodes were implanted near the skull to trigger movements through radio signals, a primitive form of neural manipulation. To the scientists, it was innovation. To others, horror. Rumors spread across the Wehrmacht. Some soldiers joked about the Führer's spy monkeys, but high-ranking officers saw potential. Tiny, agile creatures could slip through trenches, forests and rubble that no human agent could traverse. By spring 1944, Projekt Menschenaffe had caught the attention of the propaganda ministry. They dreamed of showcasing it as proof that German science could command even nature itself. Officially, the project remained secret, but whispers circulated among officers of beasts trained to obey the Reich. At Berlin's Institute for Experimental Psychology, linguists joined the effort. They created a color and tone system, a primitive binary code that allowed the animals to perform ordered tasks in sequence. Open boxes, carry packets, distinguish Allied uniforms. A few primates could complete full operations using only sound cues. That spring, the SS authorized the first field mission. If successful, these animals would enter war history as living instruments of espionage. What followed, however, was stranger and far darker than anyone expected. Spring 1944. Eastern Europe was collapsing into chaos. As Soviet forces advanced westward, Abteilung 3 selected a small area near the Polish border to test the first live field operation of Projekt Menschenaffe. The objective was simple: determine whether the primates could move through enemy-controlled territory, retrieve specific items, and return with recorded material. 4 animals were chosen, each wearing a lightweight harness, fitted with miniature cameras, chemical sensors, and coded pouches. They had been trained for weeks to respond to 3 distinct tones, one to move forward, one to stop, and one to retreat. For their handlers, the experiment was history in the making. For the animals, it was something else entirely, a descent into confusion and noise. At dawn, under the supervision of Dr. Schäfer and a small SS team, the primates were released near an abandoned farm. The location was only a few kilometers from Soviet scout positions. The goal, to infiltrate the site, collect pieces of coded documents, intentionally planted there by the Germans themselves, and return undetected. At first, the test seemed a success. The primates moved with incredible speed, darting between debris and grass, vanishing into the tree line like ghosts. The handlers followed through binoculars, transmitting coded tones via shortwave radio. But within minutes, everything started to unravel. Local gunfire erupted in the distance, Soviet patrols responding to unknown movement. The handlers panicked. One of the primates, startled by the sound, bolted toward the enemy side carrying a pouch of experimental film. Another was lost in the forest. Only 2 returned, exhausted and terrified. Hours later, an intercepted Soviet report mentioned strange small figures moving through the brush. Not men, but trained creatures. That single line became the spark of rumor that reached Allied intelligence weeks later, triggering speculation about Nazi biological agents. Despite the failure, Schäfer insisted the results were promising. He argued that a few adjustments, stronger conditioning, better communication signals could make the project viable. But internally, morale was collapsing. The animals had shown signs of psychological stress, refusal to eat, erratic behavior, sudden aggression. The scientists were beginning to realize that they were no longer studying intelligence, they were breaking it. A second test was approved for June 1944. This time the objective shifted. Instead of retrieval, the animals were to plant small magnetic devices near an enemy vehicle depot in occupied territory. It was a mission that would push both science and morality past the breaking point. Unaware of what awaited them, Schäfer's unit packed their equipment and moved south towards Silesia. The war was closing in, and time was running out for the Reich and for the project itself. By the summer of 1944, Projekt Menschenaffe had turned into a nightmare. What began as a bizarre experiment in intelligence gathering was now a desperate attempt to justify its own existence. The second field mission in Silesia unfolded under worsening conditions. The Soviet advance was relentless, and communication with Berlin was sporadic. Dr. Schäfer's team operated out of an abandoned factory, surrounded by ruined machinery and the echoes of a dying war. This time 6 primates were used. Each carried a lightweight magnetic device meant to attach to enemy vehicles and transmit a short-range pulse signal. The SS believed this would prove the feasibility of animal-borne sabotage. But when the devices malfunctioned, the results were disastrous. During one deployment, a primate triggered an early detonation, injuring a technician. Another disappeared entirely, only to reappear days later near the German camp, terrified, trembling, and carrying part of the destroyed transmitter. The sight deeply unsettled the team. Even Schäfer, usually cold and methodical, began to question the purpose of the mission. By July, resources were gone. Berlin was under constant air raids. Many of Schäfer's notes were ordered to be destroyed or moved to undisclosed locations. Some scientists defected, others were reassigned to more productive programs, such as rocket engineering or chemical research. The final mention of the project appears in a captured German memorandum dated August 2, 1944. It reads simply, "Further biological espionage operations suspended. Personnel to report to Peenemünde." After that, the trail goes dark. When Allied investigators entered Danzig months later, they found traces, broken cages, burned documents. A few surviving animals too traumatized to approach humans. The site was later demolished, buried under post-war reconstruction. For decades, the existence of Projekt Menschenaffe was dismissed as Soviet propaganda. But fragments of Schäfer's correspondence and technical sketches surfaced in the 1990s, confirming the program had indeed existed. Some of his papers described the challenge of bridging instinct and obedience, an eerie phrase hinting at the moral abyss the team had crossed. Historians now view it as a symbol of how far the Nazi regime was willing to go in its obsession with control, an experiment that tried to erase the line between science and madness. To this day, no one knows how many animals were used or what became of the last surviving subjects. In the end, Projekt Menschenaffe wasn't about intelligence. It was about desperation, the final attempt of a collapsing empire to command the impossible. A story that almost vanished, until fragments whispered the truth from the shadows of history. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Allied intelligence teams flooded the ruins of Berlin, searching for any trace of experimental programs. Among their targets were chemical weapons projects, W2 rocket documents, and a file cryptically labeled A3 Bio Operations. Most agents thought it referred to biological warfare. Only later did translators realize that bio operations meant biological intelligence units. Inside a damaged SS safe, they found a handful of water-stained papers, sketches of primates wearing harnesses, notes on signal frequencies, and one photograph labeled Test Danzig, Laboratories. The image was blurry, but unmistakable, a small macaque, carrying what looked like a transmitter strapped to its chest. The discovery baffled the Allied scientists. Had the Nazis really attempted to weaponize animal intelligence? An internal British report concluded the material was inconclusive but consistent with low-scale field trials. The documents were quietly archived under Experimental Psychology Classified. Meanwhile, Soviet forces also uncovered remnants in the east. A Red Army colonel reported a hidden facility near Königsberg containing surgical equipment and cages, fit for small apes. Those artifacts disappeared into Moscow's research archives and were never seen again. By 1947, both the US and the USSR had begun recruiting former German scientists under secret programs like Operation Paperclip. Among them was Dr. Schäfer. He was interrogated briefly but never charged. Within a few years, he resurfaced as a wildlife consultant in South America, working under a different name. To historians, this sudden disappearance only deepened the mystery. Why was a zoologist once tied to the SS allowed to live freely abroad? Some suspected he had traded his research in exchange for immunity, an echo of a pattern repeated throughout post-war science. As the Iron Curtain descended over Europe, whispers of monkey agents resurfaced in intelligence circles. Declassified CIA memoranda from the 1950s mention biological reconnaissance experiments inspired by German models. None explicitly referenced Schäfer, but the methods were identical. Training small animals for infiltration, attaching miniature recorders using radio cues. In 1952, a U.S. naval research unit tested cats fitted with directional microphones for urban surveillance. The program failed, but the concept traced directly back to documents recovered from Danzig. Meanwhile, Soviet researchers pursued similar goals under the guise of behavioral psychology, experimenting with dogs, dolphins, and primates for reconnaissance tasks. The ghost of Projekt Menschenaffe had quietly evolved into Cold War innovation. Both sides denied any connection, yet the parallels were undeniable. From the jungles of Vietnam to the laboratories of Moscow, animals became unwilling participants in humankind's obsession with control. When investigative journalists later uncovered fragments of Schäfer's diary, one line stood out: "The war ended, but the experiment never truly stopped." It was as if his strange dream had merely changed uniforms. Ethicists now cite these projects as early examples of bioengineering abuse. What began as wartime desperation became peacetime ambition, the same idea, repackaged in the language of national security. In 1998, while cataloguing newly released Bundesarchiv microfilms, historian Claudia Voss stumbled upon a folder labeled Verhaltensstudien 1943. Inside were 62 pages of fragmented notes, some written in Schäfer's distinctive handwriting. Among the sketches were diagrams of electrode placements on primate skulls and annotations, describing signal tone A, BC response confirmed. For Voss, it was the smoking gun. A publication the following year, The Ape Spy Files, sparked international fascination. Documentaries aired across Europe showing the recovered images, blurred photos of macaques wearing harnesses, fragments of control panels, handwritten logs listing training durations and feeding schedules. Skeptics argued the material could be misinterpreted. After all, wartime Germany was filled with pseudoscience. Yet digital enhancement confirmed authentic 1940s film stock and official SS stationery. The story that had once sounded like folklore now had tangible proof. Online forums, historians and educators debated the ethics. Were these animals victims or pioneers of modern neural research? For the first time, the tale of Projekt Menschenaffe reached a global audience, one ready to face uncomfortable truths about innovation born from war. Behind the cold precision of Projekt Menschenaffe stood a man whose ambition blurred the line between science and delusion. Dr. Ernst Schäfer was not a typical scientist. He was an explorer, a loyal SS officer, and above all, a dreamer convinced that nature itself could be shaped into a weapon. Before the war, Schäfer had been part of Himmler's expeditions to Tibet, where he sought proof of Aryan origins among ancient civilizations. To many within the SS hierarchy, he embodied the perfect mix of science and ideology. But to those who worked under him, he was something else, a man haunted by obsession. Former colleagues described him as brilliant yet detached, capable of spending hours observing a single animal's behavior without speaking. He believed animals possessed a pure intelligence, free from human weakness. To him, training monkeys to obey mechanical signals was not cruelty. It was evolution accelerated by human will. As the war intensified, Schäfer grew desperate. He argued that traditional warfare had reached its limit and that survival demanded innovation beyond moral boundaries. In one surviving note, he wrote, "If men cannot win, perhaps nature will fight in our place." That phrase would become the philosophical heart of Projekt Menschenaffe. Witnesses recalled his laboratory speeches, calm, persuasive, terrifying. He promised the Reich a future where animals replaced spies, where nature's silence became the perfect disguise. The SS saw it as genius. Others saw it as madness cloaked in patriotism. By early 1944, Schäfer's authority had expanded. He now commanded not only biologists but also engineers and code specialists. His lab became a miniature empire, a place where morality was suspended and curiosity ruled. There, amid the hum of generators and the stench of disinfectant, he chased a vision: to merge instinct and obedience into a single living mechanism. Some scientists tried to resist. One assistant later confessed in a post-war letter, he believed the animals were no longer animals. He saw them as extensions of himself. The assistant fled the project weeks later. He was never seen again. By then, Schäfer's obsession had consumed him. He no longer sought victory for Germany. He sought proof that his theory could rewrite the boundaries of biology. When Berlin began to fall, he reportedly destroyed hundreds of documents, not out of fear, but pride. He wanted his creation to remain a secret masterpiece, untouched by defeat. To understand Projekt Menschenaffe is to understand the psychology of obsession, the belief that knowledge justifies everything. And within that obsession, Schäfer left behind a question that still chills historians today. When does curiosity stop being discovery and become domination? In 1944, as the world plunged deeper into chaos, the concept of intelligence changed forever. Wars were no longer won only by guns and tanks. They were fought through information, deception, and unseen eyes. The Nazis called it Geheimkrieg, the secret war. Abteilung 13 was created to master this invisible battlefield. Its divisions experimented with radio waves, camouflage, and coded languages. But within that machinery of secrecy, one project stood apart, the one that tried to fuse biology with espionage. Projekt Menschenaffe was not just an experiment. It was a reflection of the era's growing belief that even life could be engineered to serve war. Every army sought the same advantage: eyes that could go where humans could not, ears that could listen without being heard. For the Allies, that meant cameras hidden in birds, transmitters in rats, and microphones in insects. For the Axis, it meant something more primal, a return to nature as a tool of conquest. Psychologists involved in the project viewed the monkeys as organic machines. Their conditioning was modeled on behaviorist theories, spreading through Europe and America, stimulus response reward. But where the Allies sought observation, Schäfer sought control. He wasn't trying to teach animals. He was trying to reprogram them. Reports mention long nights filled with the sound of metronomes, electric pulses, and high-pitched tones that echoed through the lab. The primates learned to associate each sound with movement or stillness. One whistle meant approach, another withdraw. Each mistake brought an electric shock. Each success brought food. Over months, obedience replaced instinct. Some of Schäfer's subordinates began to question whether the process worked or whether the animals had simply learned to surrender. There was no celebration in the lab, only exhaustion and silence. When one of the chimpanzees broke its harness and fled through the corridor, Schäfer ordered it captured alive for further study. The next morning, the cage was empty. No one ever found the animal again. By the end of 1944, as Berlin descended into ruins, the scientists of Abteilung 13 were no longer studying espionage. They were documenting despair. The line between intelligence gathering and psychological torture had blurred beyond repair. The project had become a mirror, reflecting the mind of its creator. Brilliant, relentless, and utterly blind to empathy. Historians later called it the War of the Invisible. And in that war, the smallest creatures became symbols of humanity's greatest contradiction, our thirst for knowledge and our willingness to destroy anything to obtain it. By late 1944, as the war edged toward collapse, the laboratories of Abteilung 13 became battlegrounds of another kind, one fought not with guns, but egos. While the world outside crumbled, inside the walls of the research compounds, rival scientists fought for recognition, resources, and the favor of the SS elite. Dr. Schäfer's growing fame had not gone unnoticed. Many within the Nazi scientific community viewed him as a threat. A man whose unorthodox ideas and personal ties to Himmler gave him too much influence. Rival departments, including the notorious Ahnenerbe and the Amt 6 Intelligence Division, began to interfere, each trying to claim credit for his discoveries. What had started as a scientific endeavor slowly devolved into a war of politics and survival. Some researchers argued that Schäfer's primate program was consuming valuable funds that could be redirected to weapons research. Others saw an opportunity to exploit his results for their own experiments. One scientist, Dr. Werner Fischer, attempted to recreate the project using trained dogs, but the results were disastrous, leading to a violent confrontation that ended with Schäfer's removal of Fischer from the program. The rivalry became personal, and rumors spread that Schäfer had ordered certain files destroyed to prevent others from understanding his methods. The atmosphere in the lab darkened. Guards were stationed outside research rooms. Scientists monitored each other, and paranoia became routine. Every discovery was treated as classified military intelligence. Schäfer began writing his notes in coded shorthand, accessible only to a select few assistants. Even food deliveries were inspected, fearing sabotage from rival units. As internal tensions grew, the project's scientific integrity collapsed. Schäfer's obsession with secrecy meant that experiments were rarely verified, and failures were buried or rewritten to appear as successes. The animals suffered, and so did the researchers. Sleep deprivation, fear of punishment, and moral exhaustion haunted the team. They were no longer scientists, they were prisoners of an idea. One assistant later recalled, "He demanded loyalty beyond reason. We were forbidden to speak of doubt. We were told that truth was weakness." The confession came decades later, written from a hospital bed in Munich, where the survivor described the final days of Danzig. "We were surrounded by the sound of collapse, bombs outside, screams inside, and he kept whispering that we were on the verge of perfection. But perfection never came. Instead, as the Reich's infrastructure imploded, Schäfer's laboratory became a microcosm of Germany itself, consumed by ambition, paranoia, and the illusion of control. When the Red Army advanced, many scientists fled, taking with them fragments of data, that would resurface years later in unexpected places. Others stayed behind, destroyed their records, or disappeared completely. By the time Allied troops entered Danzig, Abteilung 13 no longer existed. Its corridors were burned, its cages empty, its secrets scattered like ash in the wind. But even as the flames erased evidence, the myth had already taken root, whispered among surviving researchers, who claimed that somewhere, hidden in the ruins, Schäfer had preserved his most dangerous discovery. For decades after the war, rumors persisted of secret tunnels beneath Danzig, tunnels that once housed laboratories, untouched by Allied searches. In 1968, Polish construction workers stumbled upon a sealed bunker near the outskirts of Danzig. Inside, they found rusted surgical tables, broken glass cages, and fragments of notebooks marked a threen. The discovery reignited old suspicions that not all of Schäfer's research had been destroyed. Archaeologists and historians soon joined the investigation. Among the debris were strange mechanical devices, resembling harnesses and metal frames with electrical wiring, too small for humans, too complex for ordinary laboratory use. One technician recalled that the air inside still smelled faintly of disinfectant, even after 2 decades. The bunker had been sealed so tightly that time itself seemed to have frozen within its walls. Documents recovered from the site confirmed that at least 3 facilities were operational in the final months of the war. One in Danzig for biological conditioning, one in Königsberg for technical integration, and a third, never found, possibly hidden deeper inland for field testing. Each site operated independently, ensuring that no single scientist possessed the entire blueprint of the program. The Königsberg lab, according to Soviet archives declassified in the 1980s, was destroyed in early 1945 by its own personnel. Explosives were detonated to erase all trace of equipment, yet fragments survived, including a steel crate marked tierische Einheiten, animal units. Inside were glass vials, electrodes, and a damaged transmitter labeled signal type C 7.4 Hz. Historians later matched that frequency to early SS radio experiments designed for animal response training. The existence of these facilities revealed the terrifying efficiency of the Nazi scientific machine. Even as their cities burned, they kept building, testing, and recording. For them, failure was temporary, but secrecy was eternal. In 1971, Soviet researchers released a short paper titled Biopsychological Applications in the Third Reich. Buried in its technical language was a single haunting line: "One cannot destroy what was never meant to be seen." To many, it was confirmation that fragments of Projekt Menschenaffe had survived, possibly absorbed into post-war intelligence programs on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The tunnels under Danzig were sealed again in 1975, declared unsafe for public access. Officially, the artifacts were transferred to a state archive. Unofficially, no one knows where they went. Some say the crates were sent to Moscow. Others believe they were quietly taken to the West. To this day, the walls of those tunnels hold their silence, a silence as deliberate as the one the project was designed to create. Long after the war ended, the debate over Schäfer's experiments shifted from politics to philosophy. Had the project truly proven that animals could be reprogrammed? Or had it merely shown humanity's capacity for domination disguised as science? Ethologists studying the surviving reports noticed something unexpected: traces of learning patterns that hinted at primitive reasoning, not just conditioning. The primates involved in the tests appeared to adapt to complex situations faster than anticipated, sometimes defying commands to avoid danger. This contradiction fascinated later scientists. If the animals learned to disobey harmful signals, did that not indicate intelligence rather than obedience? Philosophers called it the paradox of control. The moment when the subject of an experiment reveals more awareness than the experimenter intended. In that paradox lies the heart of Projekt Menschenaffe, the idea that total control is an illusion. Schäfer's writings suggest he sensed this near the end. A note found in one of his notebooks reads, They resist not because they are beasts, but because they understand fear. If true, it means he recognized consciousness and still chose to suppress it. This moral contradiction turned the project into a case study in modern bioethics. Universities across Europe began teaching it as a cautionary tale, showing how science without empathy inevitably transforms into cruelty. Neuroscientists use the data to explore how far behavior could be altered through conditioning. But even they admitted that Schäfer's success was limited. His animals did not become spies. They became mirrors reflecting the limits of control. By the late 20th century, psychologists and philosophers revisited the question: did Schäfer's project fail because of flawed science, or because life itself refuses to be programmed? The answer remains elusive yet profound. Even in tragedy, the experiment revealed something timeless: that intelligence, whether human or animal, cannot exist without freedom. In the end, Projekt Menschenaffe was less a story of technological ambition and more a warning written in flesh. Every impulse to dominate carries within it the seed of rebellion, and in that rebellion, the animals found what their creators had lost: the instinct to survive. While Schäfer's name became infamous, many of his assistants vanished into anonymity, carrying with them the guilt of their participation. Decades later, through declassified testimonies and letters, fragments of their inner turmoil emerged, revealing that behind the uniformed coldness of the SS scientists were human beings torn apart by remorse. One of the most revealing accounts came from Dr. Heinrich Krauss, a physiologist who joined the project in 1943. In a confession written in 1957, he described the moment he realized they had crossed a line. It was no longer science. It was ritual, a ritual of obedience. We told ourselves we were serving the nation, but we were only serving our fear. Krauss admitted that many within the lab had begun to question Schäfer's sanity by mid-1944. Some whispered that he was deliberately prolonging the project to protect himself from frontline duty. Others claimed he had started talking to the animals as if they were soldiers under his command. His fixation grew so intense that he began referring to one chimpanzee, code-named L5, as the prototype of the new intelligence. When the war ended, those same men faced a new kind of battle, one of conscience. A handful cooperated with Allied investigators, offering what they called scientific amnesty, trading knowledge for freedom. Others disappeared behind new identities, taking jobs in universities, pharmaceutical companies, or psychological research institutes. A few ended their own lives, leaving behind cryptic notes that hinted at unbearable guilt. Letters recovered from a private archive in Vienna contain the following line: "They were not beasts. We were." Those 6 words summarize the moral collapse that defined the project. By the 1960s, survivors of the SS research divisions were being quietly interviewed for historical documentation. Many refused to speak on record, fearing prosecution. But one statement, preserved under anonymity, reads, "We believe control was power. Now I see it was surrender. Surrender to fear, to pride, to blindness." Their confessions, though scattered, complete the portrait of a generation that mistook obedience for progress. They remind us that even those who serve evil may not begin as monsters. They become them by choosing silence over conscience. In the shadow of their crimes, a strange truth emerges. The same intelligence that allows us to question the world also allows us to justify its destruction. And in that contradiction, humanity finds both its genius and its curse. In 1946, a year after Germany's surrender, the Allied War Crimes Commission began compiling files on Nazi scientific personnel. Among the hundreds of names listed under classified biological research, one stood out: Dr. Ernst Schäfer. Unlike many of his colleagues, Schäfer was neither executed nor imprisoned for long. Instead, he was quietly interrogated, questioned, and eventually released. His debriefings remain partially redacted, but what survives paints a chilling picture. He denied any involvement in human experimentation and described his work as a zoological innovation in military communication. When pressed about reports of animal manipulation through electrical stimulation, he dismissed them as theoretical prototypes. The Allied officers conducting the interviews weren't convinced, but they were also intrigued. The United States, now entering its rivalry with the Soviet Union, saw potential value in Schäfer's research. Through Operation Paperclip, dozens of German scientists were recruited to work in American laboratories, though Schäfer's name never appeared on the official list. Documents later revealed that his assistants were quietly transferred to the US for observation. Within 2 years, similar primate conditioning studies began appearing at American institutions, none acknowledging their origin. Meanwhile, Soviet forces had taken control of Königsberg, where they unearthed several crates of damaged equipment. The contents, electrodes, harnesses, and film reels, were transported to Moscow's Institute of Behavioral Sciences. Soviet scientists, fascinated by the concept of remote biological control, began their own classified studies under the codename Projekt Zarya. Both superpowers, now obsessed with psychological warfare, turned the remnants of Nazi science into tools of their new conflict. Schäfer's failure became a blueprint for future research, stripped of its ideology but not its darkness. In one surviving interrogation transcript, an Allied officer asked Schäfer whether he regretted his actions. He replied calmly, "Regret is for those who lose. I only regret that the experiment ended before it could speak for itself." That sentence sealed his legacy, not as a prisoner of war, but as a ghost haunting the foundations of modern intelligence science. Throughout the Cold War, both superpowers continued to explore the idea of living agents, biological extensions of surveillance technology, from insects carrying microcameras to dogs trained for reconnaissance. The shadow of Schäfer's project stretched far beyond the ruins of Nazi Germany. In 1967, the CIA launched Acoustic Kitty, an operation attempting to implant listening devices into domestic cats for field surveillance. The project cost millions and ended in tragedy when the first cat, deployed near a Soviet embassy, ran into traffic moments after release. The mission failed, but the concept proved how deeply rooted the desire for control had become. Even failure could not kill the dream of total observation. The Soviet response came in the form of Project Dolphin, led by the Navy's Institute of Hydrobiology. Dolphins were trained to detect mines, deliver payloads, and even attack intruders. Their training mirrored Schäfer's conditioning methods: whistles, tones, electric reinforcement. Neither side publicly acknowledged the other, but both were dancing to the same forgotten rhythm that began in 1943. As technology advanced, the biological focus shifted to cybernetics. Scientists began developing brain-machine interfaces, claiming to close the gap between instinct and command. The irony was almost poetic. Modern engineers reinventing the same dream that once haunted Schäfer's lab. Now, instead of primates in cages, electrodes were placed on human volunteers, soldiers, pilots, intelligence officers. One declassified report from 1978 mentions behavioral convergence between animal and machine subjects. Its diagrams look disturbingly similar to Schäfer's sketches. Though the report's author remains unknown, the handwriting matches that of one of Schäfer's former assistants. In the digital age, biology and technology finally merged, but the ethical question remained frozen in time. Every advancement echoed that same ancient experiment, reminding scientists and governments alike that progress without restraint always carries a cost. The ghosts of Danzig still lingered, not in cages or bunkers, but in laboratories filled with humming computers and blinking lights. The war had changed form, but the battle for control of minds, instincts, and truth itself had never ended. Today, the idea of blending biology and technology no longer belongs to secret bunkers. It belongs to Silicon Valley. Neural link research, artificial intelligence, and brain-controlled drones are hailed as breakthroughs. But look closer, and the same questions that haunted Schäfer's generation resurface. At what point does innovation cross into domination? Modern scientists now speak openly about predictive instinct modeling, the ability to simulate human decision-making through neural data. They call it progress. But the algorithms that make machines learn are built on the same foundation. Schäfer dreamed of turning reaction into obedience. Ethicists warn that today's AI programs reflect the same blind spot that defined the 1940s. The belief that intelligence can exist without empathy. When machines begin to mirror life, and life begins to behave like machines, we repeat the same cycle with new tools. We teach control before understanding, and precision before compassion. Some historians argue that the true legacy of Projekt Menschenaffe isn't scientific at all, it's psychological. It revealed humanity's obsession with mastery, the refusal to accept the limits of nature. The Nazis sought to control animals. Now we seek to control consciousness itself. Both pursuits are born from the same impulse, fear of the uncontrollable. In university lectures, Schäfer's name has resurfaced, not as a villain but as a warning. Professors draw lines from his laboratory to modern neural experiments, from the Danzig tunnels to tech labs filled with AI prototypes. The continuity is undeniable, and the moral gap remains unfilled. As artificial intelligence grows more autonomous, and machines begin to imitate instinct, we find ourselves at the same crossroads he once faced. We can guide evolution, or we can repeat its mistakes. The difference lies not in what we create, but in whether we remember what we destroyed to get here. History is not a collection of facts, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, Projekt Menschenaffe reflects more than a secret Nazi experiment. It reflects us. It reminds us that intelligence without empathy becomes tyranny, and that curiosity without conscience is merely another form of violence. Every generation believes it has learned from the past, yet every generation repeats it in new disguise. From Danzig's tunnels to modern labs, from primitive electrodes to digital neural maps, humanity keeps reaching into the same forbidden space, the desire to command life itself. Perhaps Schäfer's greatest failure was not scientific, but spiritual. He sought to understand intelligence by controlling it, never realizing that control is the opposite of understanding. The animals he trained did not betray him. They revealed the truth he refused to see, that even under oppression life resists. Today, we live in an age where machines think and algorithms predict our every move. We call it progress, but history whispers otherwise. The ghosts of Danzig still speak, not through superstition, but through warning, that the most dangerous experiment is the one that forgets it is an experiment. As the narrator fades and the screen turns black, imagine the echo of those laboratories, the hum of electricity, the quiet breathing of frightened creatures, the distant voice of a man convinced he was shaping the future. He was, but not the future he imagined, because the story of the Nazi monkey spy program is not just about war, or science, or cruelty. It's about the thin thread that separates creation from destruction, and how easily we cross it when we stop asking why. And that is the lesson history leaves us. That curiosity, when stripped of conscience, always ends the same way, in silence.